The blood dripped from Maggie Irving's split lip as she stumbled through the darkness, the vast Wyoming wilderness spreading before her like a terrible promise. Freedom beckoned, but death might come first. Behind her, the echoes of her husband's rage still rang in her ears, drowning out the soft crunch of pine needles beneath her bare, bleeding feet. 3 years of marriage to Victor Greene had taught her one thing. Tonight, he would kill her if she didn't run. Wyoming Territory, 1875. A cold spring night with no moon to guide her way. Her threadbare nightgown offered little protection against the chill as she pushed forward, one hand clutching her side where Victor's boot had connected with her ribs. The other hand gripped the small cloth bundle containing everything she dared take, a tarnished locket from her mother, the last of her savings hidden beneath a floorboard, and a single photograph of her parents, both long dead. Should have killed you when I had the chance. Victor's voice boomed across the valley behind her. Close. Too close. The distant flicker of torchlight confirmed her fears he was tracking her. Perhaps with neighbors, telling them she'd gone mad, stealing his money, needing to be brought home for her own safety. The same lies he'd told the sheriff the last time. Maggie pushed her body forward, ignoring the pain radiating through every limb. 22 years old, and she might die tonight in these woods, her body never to be found. But death in the wilderness seemed a kinder fate than another night under Victor's fists. The first light of dawn revealed the vast emptiness surrounding her. Hours of walking had brought her to unfamiliar territory, rolling hills covered in sage and scrub, the distant silhouette of mountains to the west. Her throat burned with thirst, her stomach cramped with hunger. The bundle felt heavier with each step, but she clutched it tighter. It was all she had left in the world. By midday, Maggie could go no farther. The spring sun beat down mercilessly as she collapsed beneath the shade of a lone cottonwood tree beside a small creek. She drank greedily from cupped hands, the cold water a blessed relief against her parched throat. Her reflection in the rippling surface told a grim story: swollen eye, split lip, dark bruises forming across her cheekbone. Her auburn hair hung in tangled knots around her face. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jolted her awake. Panic flooded her system as she scrambled to her feet, ready to run, certain Victor had found her. But the figure approaching on horseback wasn't her husband. The stranger rode tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by the brim of a well-worn hat. "Madam." His voice carried across the distance between them, deep but cautious. "You all right there?" Maggie stepped back, her body tensing. Men couldn't be trusted. Victor had taught her that lesson well enough. The rider stopped his horse a respectful distance away. "I mean no harm." He dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Name's Jake Ingram. My ranch is about 5 miles yonder." He gestured vaguely westward. "Couldn't help but notice you seem in some difficulty." She said nothing, eyes darting around for an escape route. "You're hurt," he observed, keeping his distance, "and a fair way from anywhere. Can I offer some assistance?" The man Jake looked to be in his early 30s, tall and lean with the weathered complexion of someone who spent his days outdoors. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, faded denim pants, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing tanned forearms, a leather vest. A revolver hung at his hip, but his hands remained visible and non-threatening. "I don't need help," Maggie said, her voice hoarse from disuse and thirst. "I'm just passing through." Jake's eyes, a warm brown, she noticed took in her appearance with a frown. "Passing through to where, if you don't mind my asking?" "Nearest town, Silverdale, 20 miles east. Nothing but open country, and mice spread for miles around." Maggie swayed slightly, exhaustion and hunger making her dizzy. The truth was, she had no destination. She'd fled with no plan beyond escape. "I can take you to town," Jake offered, "or offer you a meal and clean water at my ranch." My housekeeper, Mrs. Walton, is there. Proper woman. Salt of the earth. He added the last part as if to reassure her of his honorable intentions. Before she could answer, distant hoofbeats reached them, several riders by the sound of it. Maggie's eyes widened in terror. That's him, she whispered. My husband. Jake's expression hardened. The one responsible for those marks on your face? She nodded, frantically gathering her small bundle. Get on my horse, Jake said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He helped her into the saddle, then grabbed the reins. Hang on. He led the horse into a small ravine, hidden from the main path. Stay quiet. The riders approached 3 men from the sound of it. Victor's voice carried clearly in the still afternoon air. She can't have gotten far. Crazy woman's been threatening to run for weeks. Doc Jenkins says it's female hysteria. I've got to find her before she hurts herself. Maggie trembled in the saddle, white-knuckled grip on the pommel. Jake's face remained impassive, but she saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Another voice responded. We've been searching since dawn, Victor. Maybe she headed south instead. We keep looking. Victor's voice cracked like a whip. She's my wife, and she's coming home. The riders passed by their hiding spot without pausing. When the hoofbeats faded into the distance, Jake looked up at Maggie. Your husband seems mighty concerned, he said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. He'll kill me if he finds me, Maggie replied simply. The admission hung in the air between them. Jake nodded once, seemingly having made a decision. My offer stands. Food, shelter, safety. At least until we figure out what comes next. Maggie weighed her options: trust this stranger or continue alone, exhausted and injured, with Victor hunting her. Neither choice seemed good, but at least the cowboy hadn't raised a hand to her. Why would you help me? She asked. You don't know me. Jake's gaze lifted to the horizon, then back to her face. My mother fled a man like your husband when I was just a boy. No one helped her. Something old and pained flickered behind his eyes. She didn't make it. The simple statement contained volumes. Maggie found herself nodding. Just for night. Then I'll move on. Jake didn't argue. He walked alongside the horse, leading it carefully through the brush until they reached a narrow trail. Ranch is about an hour's ride from here.
Can you stay in the saddle that long?
I'll manage, Maggie said, straightening her back despite the pain in her ribs. They traveled in silence, Jake occasionally glancing back to check on her. The landscape gradually changed, rolling hills giving way to greener pastures. In the distance, a modest ranch house came into view, smoke curling from the chimney. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby field. It's not much, Jake said, misinterpreting her wide-eyed stare. But it's mine. Paid for it free and clear last year. It's beautiful, Maggie whispered. And it was not grand or ostentatious like the house Victor had inherited from his father, but welcoming. A home, not a prison. As they approached, an older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on an apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her face lined but kind. Jake Ingram, who've you brought home this time? She called, her eyes widening as she took in Maggie's appearance. Mrs. Walton, this is. Jake paused, realizing he hadn't asked her name. Maggie, she supplied quietly. Maggie Greene. Miss Greene needs some tending to, Jake said. And a safe place to rest. Mrs. Walton's expression softened with understanding. Come inside, child. Let's get you cleaned up. Jake helped Maggie from the horse, his hands strong but gentle at her waist. Her legs nearly buckled as she slid to the ground, and he steadied her with a firm grip on her elbow. Sorry, she mumbled, embarrassed by her weakness. Nothing to apologize for, he replied. You've had a hard journey. Mrs. Walton took charge immediately, ushering Maggie into the house. The interior was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, wooden furniture worn smooth with use, a few books stacked on a side table. It smelled of fresh bread and coffee. "I'll draw a bath," Mrs. Walton said, "and find you some clean clothes. You look about the size my daughter was." While the older woman bustled about, Jake remained by the door. "I'll check the perimeter. Make sure those men didn't circle back. Mrs. Walton will take good care of you." Maggie nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. Her throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you," she managed. Jake tipped his hat and disappeared outside. Mrs. Walton returned moments later, leading Maggie to a small back room where a copper tub had been filled with steaming water. "Take your time, dear," the older woman said. "I've set out soap and a towel. And there's a nightgown and robe on the chair there. We can find you proper day clothes tomorrow." Left alone, Maggie sank into the hot water with a gasp of pain that turned to relief as the warmth seeped into her aching muscles. She scrubbed away the dirt and blood, wincing as the soap stung her cuts. The full extent of her injuries became visible. Purplish bruises bloomed across her ribs and back. Fingerprints marked her arms, and a long scrape ran down her leg from falling during her escape. By the time she emerged, dressed in the borrowed nightgown, the sky outside had darkened to twilight. Mrs. Walton had prepared a simple meal: beef stew, fresh bread, and tea. "Eat slowly now," the housekeeper advised. "Your stomach needs to adjust." Jake returned as she was finishing her meal. He'd changed his shirt and washed up, his dark hair damp at the temples. He accepted a bowl of stew from Mrs. Walton with thanks. "No sign of riders," he reported. "But I'll keep watch tonight just the same." "You should rest," Maggie protested. "You've done enough." Jake shook his head. "I'll sleep when I'm certain we're not going to have unwanted visitors." Mrs. Walton showed Maggie to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This was Jake's mother's room," she explained. "He keeps it ready for guests, though we don't get many out this way." The room was simply furnished: a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a lamp. A framed photograph on the wall showed a beautiful young woman with Jake's eyes, standing beside a stern-looking man. "His parents?" Maggie asked. Mrs. Walton nodded. "Elizabeth and Thomas Ingram. Good woman, Elizabeth. Deserved better than she got." The housekeeper's expression turned sad. "Jake was just 12 when she died. He doesn't speak of it often." Maggie's heart constricted, understanding the weight behind Jake's earlier words about his mother. Mrs. Walton bid her good night, leaving Maggie alone with her thoughts. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Every creak and distant sound had her sitting upright, heart pounding, certain Victor had found her. Near midnight, she gave up on sleep and crept into the main room. Jake sat by the window, rifle across his lap, staring into the darkness beyond. He turned at her approach. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him coming for me." Jake nodded in understanding. "The first night's the hardest. It gets easier." "Does it?" She wrapped her arms around herself. "I keep thinking about tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Where will I go? What will I do? I have no family, no money except what little I manage to save." "You have time to figure it out," Jake said. "You're welcome here until you do." "Why would you take such a risk for a stranger?" Maggie asked, genuinely puzzled by his generosity. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "My father was like your husband," he finally said, his voice low. "Mean when he drank, meaner when he didn't. My mother took it for years, trying to shield me from the worst of it. One night, when I was 12, she'd had enough. Packed our things while he was at the saloon, planned to catch the stage to Denver the next morning." He paused, his fingers tightening on the rifle. "He came home early, found her bags." Maggie sat down slowly in the chair opposite him, understanding where this story was heading. "I tried to stop him," Jake continued. 12 years old, thinking I was man enough to stand up to him. His hand unconsciously touched his jawline, where Maggie noticed a thin scar. He put me through a window. By the time I came to, my mother was dead. The final words were spoken so matter-of-factly that their impact was all the more devastating. "I'm so sorry," Maggie whispered. "My father hanged himself in jail before they could bring him to trial." Jake's eyes, when they met hers, held no pity for himself, only resolve. So when I see a woman running from a man's fists, I don't ask myself if I should help. I ask myself what kind of man I'd be if I didn't. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within her, a part of her that had begun to believe Victor's constant insistence that no one would ever help her, that no one would believe her over him. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for what she felt. They sat in companionable silence until Maggie's eyelids grew heavy. This time, when she returned to bed, sleep found her quickly. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee. Maggie dressed in the clothes Mrs. Walton had left for her, a simple cotton dress, faded but clean, and sturdy boots that were slightly too large but manageable, with an extra pair of socks. She found Mrs. Walton in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. "Jake's out checking the cattle," the older woman informed her. "There's coffee on the stove and eggs keeping warm in the oven." Maggie insisted on helping with the chores, despite Mrs. Walton's protests. Working alongside the housekeeper gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Victor had forbidden her from doing most household tasks, hiring servants instead while keeping Maggie like a bird in a gilded cage, displayed when it suited him and punished when it didn't. Jake returned mid-morning, bringing news that troubled his normally calm expression. "Riders came through Silverdale yesterday evening," he reported. "3 men asking about a woman matching your description. Told folks she was touched in the head, dangerous to herself." Maggie's hands trembled as she dried a dish. Did they say where they were headed? North, according to Abe at the general store. But that could be misdirection. Jake removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I need to ride into town for supplies. Mrs. Walton will stay with you." "I'm putting you all at risk," Maggie said, guilt washing over her. "I should move on." "And go where?" Jake asked reasonably. "Without a horse or supplies." "No, you're safer here for now." His tone softened. "Besides, Mrs. Walton appreciates the help. Says you're a natural in the kitchen." The older woman harumphed good-naturedly. "Girl has a talent for pie crust, I'll give her that." Jake departed shortly after, promising to return before dusk. Mrs. Walton kept Maggie busy with household tasks, but her mind kept returning to Victor. Would he give up and return to their home near Cheyenne? Or would his pride drive him to continue the search? He'd always been obsessive, possessive, treating her more like property than a wife. They had met when Maggie was just 18, newly orphaned after her father's death from pneumonia. Victor Greene had seemed like salvation, then handsome at 35, wealthy from his banking ventures, and charming in public. The first blow had come 3 weeks after their wedding, a slap for spilling tea on an important guest's coat. The apologies and flowers had followed, then the promises it would never happen again. But it always did. And it always grew worse. Jake returned as promised, his saddlebags laden with supplies. His expression was grim as he pulled Maggie and Mrs. Walton aside. "Your husband's offered a reward," he told Maggie. $200 for information leading to your return. Claims you're unwell. Took money from his safe." Maggie's blood ran cold. "I only took what was mine, the money my father left me that Victor kept for safekeeping." "Man like that doesn't see it that way," Jake said. "In his mind, everything you have belongs to him, including you." "What do we do?" Mrs. Walton asked, her usual practicality evident even in crisis. Jake's jaw set in determination. "We get Miss Greene somewhere safer, somewhere Victor Greene won't think to look." He turned to Maggie. "Do you have any distant relations?" "Friends he doesn't know about." She shook her head. Victor made sure I lost touch with everyone. Said they were bad influences. Classic, Mrs. Walton muttered darkly. Isolate them first, then break them down. Jake paced the small kitchen, thinking. I have a friend in Colorado. Runs a silver mine outside Denver. Good man, trustworthy. He could arrange work, a place to stay until things settle. Hope flickered within Maggie, but fear quickly doused it. Victor won't stop looking. Not ever. His pride won't let him. Then perhaps we need to give him a reason to stop, Jake said, something hard entering his voice. Men like Victor Greene only understand one thing: force greater than their own. Jake, Mrs. Walton cautioned, you're talking foolishness now. I'm talking about ending this, he replied. Properly, legally, if possible. And, if not, Mrs. Walton challenged. Jake didn't answer, but his hand briefly touched the revolver at his hip. The gesture sent a chill through Maggie. No, she said firmly. I won't have more violence because of me. I won't have you risking your life or your freedom. Sometimes a man has to stand for what's right, Jake said quietly. And sometimes, Mrs. Walton interjected, there are better ways than guns. She turned to Maggie. Judge Patterson in Silverdale is a fair man. If you were to file for divorce on grounds of cruelty, a divorce? Maggie interrupted, astonished. No court would grant me that against Victor's wishes. He's a respected businessman. I'm just a woman with no standing and no witnesses to what he's done. You have us now, Jake said, and your injuries tell their own story. The bruises had begun to fade, but the evidence remained yellowish marks across her skin that would soon disappear, leaving her with no proof of Victor's brutality. It would be my word against his, Maggie said dejectedly. And he's very convincing. They retired that night without a clear plan, the weight of uncertainty hanging over the household. Maggie slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares of Victor finding her, dragging her back to their home, locking her away forever. She woke at dawn to find Jake already up, saddling his horse in the yard. She approached, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. You're leaving? She asked. He nodded. Thought I'd ride the perimeter. Make sure we don't have unexpected company. Might go as far as Miller's Creek, see if there's been any sign of riders. Be careful, Maggie said, surprised by how much the thought of Jake in danger troubled her. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his gaze. Always am. The day passed slowly. Maggie helped Mrs. Walton with the laundry, hanging sheets on the line to dry in the spring sunshine. The simple domesticity of the task soothed her, reminding her of happier days helping her mother with similar chores before her parents had died. You've got a good hand with housework, Mrs. Walton observed. Not afraid to get those fingers dirty. My mother believed in practical education, Maggie replied with a small smile. Said a woman should know how to run a household whether she had servants or not. Smart woman, Mrs. Walton nodded approvingly. Like her daughter. The compliment warmed Maggie. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with respect rather than condescension. As they were preparing the evening meal, the distant sound of hoofbeats approached. Maggie tensed, her hand tightening on the knife she'd been using to cut vegetables. Mrs. Walton moved to the window, then relaxed. It's just Jake, she confirmed. And alone. Thank the Lord. Jake entered the kitchen looking tired but satisfied. No sign of trouble, he reported. Stopped by the Miller place. Old man says no strangers have passed through. Relief flooded Maggie, but she knew it was temporary. Victor wouldn't give up so easily. After dinner, as Mrs. Walton retired for the night, Jake invited Maggie to sit on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet blackness of the sky. In the distance, coyotes called to one another. I've been thinking about your situation, Jake said after a comfortable silence. There might be a solution, but it's unconventional. Maggie turned to him, curious. What kind of solution? Jake seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. According to the law, a husband has certain rights over his wife, her property, her movements.
He paused.
But if you were to remarry? Maggie stared at him, uncomprehending at first, then with dawning realization. Remarry? But I'm already married. And even if I weren't, who would? She stopped, seeing the answer in Jake's steady gaze. It would be a marriage in name only, he hastened to add. A legal protection, nothing more. If you were my wife, Victor would have no claim on you. And if he tried to press the matter, he'd have to admit to abandonment for your previous marriage to be dissolved. You can't be serious, Maggie whispered. I'm deadly serious, Jake replied. I know it's not ideal. You don't know me well, and what you do know might not inspire confidence. I'm just a rancher with modest means and no fine education. But I can offer you safety and respect, which is more than Victor Greene has given you. The proposal, if it could be called, that left Maggie speechless. Part of her recognized the practical wisdom of Jake's suggestion. Another part rebelled at the idea of tying herself to another man when she barely escaped the first. I need time to think, she finally said. Jake nodded. Of course. It's not a decision to make lightly. He stood, stretching his tall frame. Whatever you decide, my offer of help stands. One way or another, we'll ensure you're safe from him. The following morning, Maggie woke early and slipped outside before the others were up. The ranch looked different in the pale dawn light, peaceful, full of possibility. She walked to the small corral where Jake's horses grazed, leaning against the fence to watch them. She had spent most of the night weighing Jake's unusual proposition. A marriage of convenience was not what she had dreamed of as a young girl, but then, neither was fleeing an abusive husband with nothing but the clothes on her back. Life had taught her harsh lessons about the difference between romantic fantasies and survival. Jake found her there an hour later, bringing a steaming cup of coffee, which he offered wordlessly. She accepted it with a grateful smile. I've been thinking about your proposal, Maggie said after a few moments. It's generous, but I can't accept. Jake nodded, his expression giving nothing away. May I ask why? Because it wouldn't be fair to you, she replied honestly. You deserve a real wife, someone who comes to you freely, not out of desperation. And I need to learn to stand on my own, to be something other than someone's wife. I understand, Jake said. And respect your decision. He turned to face her fully. But my offer of help still stands. We'll find another way to ensure your safety. His quiet acceptance of her refusal only increased Maggie's admiration for him. Victor would have raged, cajoled, made her feel guilty for denying him anything. They returned to the house for breakfast, the matter seemingly settled. Mrs. Walton served hotcakes with maple syrup, chattering about her plans to start a vegetable garden now that the spring weather had settled. The peaceful morning was shattered by the distant sound of approaching riders. Jake moved to the window, his body tensing as he peered through the curtains. 3 men, he reported grimly. One matches your description of Victor. Terror clutched at Maggie's heart. How did they find me? Doesn't matter now, Jake said, reaching for his rifle. Mrs. Walton, take Miss Greene to the root cellar. Stay there until I come for you. Jake, no, Maggie protested. This is my fight. I won't have you facing Victor because of me. This became my fight the moment I found you by that creek, Jake replied, checking his weapon. Now go with Mrs. Walton. The older woman took Maggie's arm, pulling her toward the back of the house. Come, child. That man knows what he's doing. Reluctantly, Maggie allowed herself to be led to the small root cellar accessible through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. The space was cool and dark, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. Mrs. Walton lit a small lantern, casting eerie shadows on the rough walls. Above them, they heard the front door open, followed by the murmur of male voices. Though muffled, Victor's distinctive tone carried smooth and cultured in public, hiding the cruelty beneath. I'm simply looking for my wife, Mr. Ingram. She's unwell, you understand. Suffered a tragic miscarriage last month and hasn't been herself since. The doctor prescribed rest, but she became confused, paranoid. Took it into her head that I meant her harm. Maggie's hands clenched into fists. There had been no miscarriage, only Victor's rage, when she'd failed yet again to conceive the son he demanded. Jake's response was too low to hear clearly, but his tone was firm. Victor's voice rose in response. Several travelers reported seeing a woman matching my wife's description near your property. I have every right to search these premises. Not without a warrant, you don't. Jake's voice came clearer now, hard as steel. This is private property, Mr. Greene. Do you know who I am? Victor's voice took on the dangerous silkiness Maggie knew preceded his worst outbursts. I have connections throughout the territory. One word from me could make life very difficult for a small rancher like yourself. Are you threatening me, Mr. Greene? Jake asked, his voice deceptively calm. Simply stating facts, Victor replied. Now, I insist you allow us to search your home. If my wife isn't here, we'll trouble you no further. A tense silence followed. Maggie held her breath, praying Jake wouldn't relent. I said no. Jake's voice carried clearly. And I suggest you and your friends leave my property now. This is absurd, Victor snapped. I know she's here. The woman at the general store said a stranger matching Maggie's description was with you 2 days ago. The woman you spoke to was mistaken, Jake replied evenly. You're harboring my wife. Victor's control finally snapped. She is my property under the law, and you have no right to keep her from me. No man owns another person in this country, Mr. Greene. Not anymore. She's my wife, Victor shouted. And that gives you the right to beat her? Jake's voice remained steady, but with an edge like a knife. To break her ribs and split her lip? To hunt her like an animal when she finally finds the courage to run. Maggie gasped. Jake was directly confronting Victor, something no one had ever done before. You know nothing about my marriage, Victor snarled. Maggie is unstable, prone to accidents. Anyone in Cheyenne will tell you how devoted I've been, how patient with her fragility. I know what I saw, Jake countered. A terrified woman covered in bruises that no accident could explain. So she is here, Victor said triumphantly. You've just admitted it. I've admitted nothing, Jake replied. But I'll tell you this, if I did know where your wife was, I'd do everything in my power to keep her safe from you. A scraping sound followed, furniture being moved, heavy footsteps crossing the floor. You've made a very dangerous enemy, Ingram, Victor said, his voice now close enough that Maggie knew he must be standing directly in front of Jake. I'll return with a sheriff and a warrant. And when I find Maggie, she'll learn what happens to disobedient wives. As for you, that's close enough, Jake interrupted, and Maggie could picture him standing his ground. I've asked you politely to leave. I won't ask again. You think that rifle scares me? I have 2 armed men with me, Victor laughed. What do you have? An old woman, and a gun you probably don't have the spine to use. Test me and find out, Jake replied, his voice so cold it sent shivers down Maggie's spine even from her hiding place. A tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of boots shifting on wooden floorboards. This isn't over, Victor finally said. Not by a long shot. It is for today, Jake answered. Now get off my land. The front door opened and closed. Through the small, ground-level window in the root cellar, Maggie caught a glimpse of 3 men mounting horses, Victor's rigid posture radiating fury even from a distance. They rode away, but Maggie had no doubt they'd be back. Several minutes passed before the trapdoor opened and Jake's face appeared. It's safe to come up now, he said, reaching down to help first Mrs. Walton, then Maggie. He'll be back, Maggie said, trembling with the aftermath of fear. With the sheriff, just like he threatened. Let him, Jake replied, setting his rifle aside. Sheriff Rollins is a fair man who won't be impressed by Greene's money or influence. But you're right that we need to prepare for his return. Mrs. Walton said about making a fresh pot of coffee, her practical nature asserting itself in crisis. You could take her to the Wilcox place, she suggested to Jake. They're still visiting family back east. House will be empty for another month at least. Jake shook his head. First place they'd look once they realized she wasn't here. No, we need something more definitive. He turned to Maggie, his expression grave. I know you refused my offer earlier, and I respect your reasons. But circumstances have changed. Victor knows you're in the area now, and he won't stop until he finds you. Maggie sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. What do you suggest? We ride for Silverdale today, Jake said. Find Judge Patterson and make our case. If you officially file for divorce, citing cruelty, it establishes a legal record of Victor's behavior. It won't stop him immediately, but it begins the process of severing his legal claim on you. And if the judge refuses to hear my petition? Maggie asked. If he sides with Victor? Then we implement my original suggestion, Jake replied. A marriage certificate signed by the same judge would supersede Victor's claim, particularly if he's been publicly accused of abandonment and cruelty. It's a sound plan, Mrs. Walton agreed. Either way, you gain legal protection. Maggie considered her limited options. Continuing to hide wasn't sustainable. Running alone would likely end in capture or worse. Jake's plan, unconventional as it was, offered the best chance for a real solution. All right, she agreed. We'll try the divorce petition first. They moved quickly after that. Mrs. Walton packed food and supplies while Jake saddled 2 horses. Maggie changed into riding clothes borrowed from Jake's store's trousers and a shirt that were too large but workable when belted and rolled up. The dress would only slow you down if we need to ride hard, Jake explained. And it's a 4-hour journey to Silverdale. They set out mid-morning, taking a circuitous route to avoid the main road where Victor and his men might be watching. Jake led them through little-used trails and across open country, always alert for signs of pursuit. Maggie hadn't ridden in years. Victor had deemed it unladylike early in their marriage and sold her mare, but the skill returned quickly. The physical sensation of controlling the powerful animal beneath her, of moving freely across the open landscape, awakened something that had been dormant inside her. For the first time since her escape, she felt a flicker of real hope. You ride well, Jake observed as they paused to rest the horses near a small stream. My father taught me when I was young, Maggie replied, smiling at the memory. Said every Wyoming girl should know how to handle a horse. Victor didn't approve. Victor sounds like a man with many disapprovals, Jake remarked dryly. Too many to count, Maggie agreed. Everything I loved before our marriage gradually became forbidden: riding, reading certain books, visiting friends without his supervision, even wearing colors he deemed too bright or attention-seeking. Jake's expression darkened. Men like that. They don't want wives. They want possessions, things they can control and display at their convenience. I was so blind, Maggie said softly. When we met, he seemed so different. Charming, attentive, interested in my thoughts and feelings. By the time I saw the truth, it was too late. That's how they operate, Jake replied. Like wolves in sheep's clothing. My father was the pillar of the community to outsiders, a monster behind closed doors. They continued their journey, the conversation shifting to lighter topics: the beauty of the landscape, Jake's plans for his ranch, Maggie's childhood memories of happier times. Despite the serious purpose of their ride, Maggie found herself enjoying Jake's company, his quiet strength and unexpected humor. By mid-afternoon, Silverdale appeared on the horizon, a small but thriving town serving the surrounding ranches and farms. A main street lined with wooden buildings stretched between 2 low hills, with smaller residential streets branching off like tributaries from a river. "We'll go straight to Judge Patterson's office," Jake said as they approached. "Best to conduct our business quickly and be on our way before word of our presence spreads." They rode directly to a modest building near the town's small courthouse. A weathered sign identified it as Samuel Patterson, Justice of the Peace and Notary Public. Jake helped Maggie dismount, then tied their horses to the hitching post. "Ready?" he asked, studying her face. Maggie straightened her borrowed shirt, suddenly conscious of her unusual attire and what the judge might think of a woman dressed as a man. But the stakes were too high for such concerns. "Ready," she confirmed. The office was empty save for an elderly man bent over a ledger at a large desk. He looked up as they entered, spectacles perched on the end of his nose. His expression remained neutral as he took in Maggie's appearance. "Judge Patterson?" Jake asked, removing his hat respectfully. "The same," the older man confirmed. "What can I do for you folks today? Marriage license? Property dispute? A divorce petition?" Maggie said before Jake could answer. "On grounds of cruelty." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly, but he motioned for them to sit in the wooden chairs before his desk. "That's a serious matter, young lady. Not something I take lightly." "Nor do I," Maggie replied steadily. Judge Patterson studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll need your full name and your husband's, and evidence of the alleged cruelty." "Maggie Elizabeth Greene, married to Victor James Greene of Cheyenne," she supplied. "As for evidence..." She hesitated, then unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of her shirt, pulling the fabric aside to reveal the still visible bruises across her collarbone and upper chest. The judge's expression hardened at the sight. "I see. And these injuries were inflicted by your husband?" "Yes, Your Honor. These and many others over the past 3 years." "Do you have witnesses to these incidents?" Judge Patterson asked, though his tone had softened slightly. "No, Your Honor. Victor was always careful that way. But Mr. Ingram can testify to my condition when he found me 4 days ago, after I fled my home." The judge turned to Jake, who nodded confirmation. "She was in bad shape, Judge. Bruised face, split lip, injuries to her ribs consistent with being kicked. She was barefoot and exhausted, having walked through the night to escape." Judge Patterson removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I don't doubt your account, Miss Greene. But without witnesses to the actual incidents, and given your husband's standing in Cheyenne society, a divorce petition would be difficult to sustain if contested." Maggie's heart sank. "So, there's nothing to be done? I must either return to a man who will likely kill me or live as a fugitive." "I didn't say that," the judge replied. "There are alternatives. Abandonment is grounds for divorce in this territory. If your husband were to leave you for an extended period, or if you were to establish residence elsewhere under certain circumstances." "What circumstances?" Jake asked. The judge looked between them. "If Miss Greene were to remarry, believing in good faith that her first husband had abandoned her, the second marriage would have legal standing. The first husband would have to prove the absence of abandonment, which would be difficult if there are community witnesses to his failure to provide support or contact." "But I've only been gone 4 days," Maggie pointed out. "That hardly constitutes abandonment." "In normal circumstances, no," Judge Patterson agreed. "But given the evidence of cruelty, and if you were to sign an affidavit stating that you fled in fear for your life after a pattern of abuse extending over years, well, the law allows some flexibility in interpretation." Maggie exchanged a glance with Jake, understanding dawning. "You're suggesting what Jake proposed a marriage that would supersede Victor's claim." "I'm suggesting nothing officially," the judge said carefully. "Merely explaining how the law might be interpreted in certain situations." "And you would perform such a marriage? Even knowing the circumstances?" Jake asked. Judge Patterson's gaze was steady. "I've been on the bench for 30 years, Mr. Ingram. Seen too many women trapped in marriages that were little better than slavery. The law is meant to serve justice, not perpetuate cruelty. He turned to Maggie. Is this something you would consider, young lady? Entering a marriage with Mr. Ingram to secure your legal freedom. Maggie took a deep breath. Yes, she said simply. The judge nodded once. Then I'll prepare the necessary documents. The marriage can be performed immediately, with my clerk and deputy as witnesses. It happened so quickly that Maggie barely had time to process it. Within an hour, she stood beside Jake before Judge Patterson, repeating vows she had once spoken to Victor with such different emotions. The judge's clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, had provided Maggie with a clean dress for the ceremony, insisting it would help establish the legitimacy of the proceedings if questioned later. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Patterson concluded, closing his Bible. May your union be blessed with kindness and respect. He handed the signed marriage certificate to Jake. Keep this safe. It's your legal protection if Victor Greene attempts to challenge the marriage. As they prepared to leave, the judge took Maggie aside. I know this wasn't the wedding you dreamed of, Mrs. Ingram, but I've known Jake since he was a boy. He's a good man who will treat you with the respect you deserve. Thank you, Maggie replied, touched by the judge's concern. For everything. Outside, Jake helped Maggie onto her horse, his manner unchanged despite their altered relationship. We should ride back a different way, he suggested, in case Greene's men are watching the main road. They took a northern route, adding distance but avoiding the more traveled paths. The enormity of what they had done settled over Maggie as they rode. She was now, legally, Jake Ingram's wife. A marriage based not on love or even attraction, but on mutual need and respect. Are you all right? Jake asked as they stopped to water the horses several hours into their journey. You've been quiet. Just thinking, Maggie replied. Everything's happened so fast. 3 days ago, I was running for my life, and now I'm married to a man I barely know. You're having regrets, Jake observed, his tone neutral. Not regrets, Maggie corrected. More like disbelief that this is my life now. She looked at him directly. I want you to know that I'm grateful, Jake. Most men wouldn't have done what you did. Most men haven't seen what I've seen, he replied. Or maybe they have, and just chose to look away. He adjusted his horse's saddle, giving her a moment of privacy with her thoughts. For what it's worth, this marriage doesn't have to change anything between us. You're free to live your life as you choose. If you want to stay at the ranch until you decide what comes next, you're welcome. If you want to move on once the dust settles, I'll understand. His generosity of spirit moved her deeply. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. They continued their journey, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Jake estimated they were about an hour from the ranch when he suddenly pulled up short, raising his hand for Maggie to stop. What is it? She asked, scanning the terrain ahead. Smoke, Jake said grimly, pointing toward a dark plume rising in the distance in the direction of his ranch. Without another word, they urged their horses forward, pushing the animals to a gallop across the open prairie. As they crested a hill overlooking the property, Maggie gasped in horror. The ranch house was engulfed in flames, thick black smoke pouring from the windows and roof. Near the burning structure stood 3 men, Victor and his companions, while a 4th figure lay motionless on the ground. Mrs. Walton, Jake whispered, his face draining of color. Before Maggie could speak, Jake spurred his horse down the hill, drawing his revolver as he rode. Maggie followed, terror clutching at her heart. Victor turned at their approach, a cold smile spreading across his handsome features. The happy couple returns, he called out. How convenient. Jake dismounted in one fluid motion, rushing to Mrs. Walton's side. The older woman was moving weakly, alive but injured. Relief washed over his features as he helped her to sit up. What did they do to you? He asked urgently. Just roughed me up a bit, Mrs. Walton replied, her voice shaky but determined. I'll live, Jake. But they've burned everything. Jake turned to face Victor, fury etched into every line of his face. This ends now, Greene. Victor laughed, the sound chilling in its lack of humanity. Indeed it does. You've stolen my wife, Ingram. Did you really think I'd let that stand? I didn't steal anything, Jake replied, his voice dangerously calm. Maggie chose to leave you. And now she's my wife under the law. Victor's smile faltered slightly. What nonsense is this? Judge Patterson married us this afternoon, Jake said, gesturing for Maggie to stay back. The marriage certificate is legal and binding. Maggie is no longer your wife.
Impossible, Victor snarled.
A marriage can't be dissolved that easily. It can when the first husband is guilty of abandonment and cruelty, Jake countered. Judge Patterson agreed that Maggie had grounds for believing herself free to remarry. Victor's face contorted with rage. I'll kill you for this, he hissed. Both of you. And that interfering judge. I'll burn everything you care about, destroy everyone who helped you. He gestured at the burning ranch house. This is just the beginning. Jake's hand tightened on his revolver. Leave now, Greene. While you still can. Or what? Victor sneered. You'll shoot me? In front of witnesses? You'll hang for murder. Self-defense isn't murder, Jake replied evenly. Especially when the other man draws first. Victor's eyes narrowed as he assessed Jake's resolve. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached for the gun at his hip. Don't, Maggie pleaded, stepping forward. Victor, please. Just leave us be.
Go back to Cheyenne.
You can tell everyone I died. Save face with your friends. Be quiet, Maggie. Victor snapped. This is between men now. No, she replied, finding strength in her fear. This has always been about me. About your need to own and control me. I'm not your property, Victor. I never was. Victor's face darkened with fury. You ungrateful whore, he snarled. After everything I gave you. You gave me nothing but pain and fear, Maggie interrupted. And I won't live that way anymore. With a roar of rage, Victor drew his gun, aiming not at Jake, but at Maggie. Before he could fire, Jake's revolver barked once, the sound echoing across the open land. Victor staggered backward, a look of genuine surprise crossing his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. He fell to his knees, then toppled forward onto the dusty ground. His two companions stood frozen, weapons half drawn, staring at their fallen employer. Jake's gun shifted to cover them. Your choice, he said simply. Join him or ride away. The men exchanged a quick glance, then raised their hands in surrender. We were just hired guns, one said quickly. Paid to help find his wife. We didn't sign on for burning or killing. Then take him with you, Jake ordered. Back to Cheyenne. Tell the sheriff there that Victor Greene died attempting to murder his former wife and burn a man's home. Judge Patterson in Silverdale will confirm the legal divorce and remarriage. The men nodded, clearly eager to distance themselves from the situation. They hoisted Victor's body still breathing, but barely onto his horse, then mounted their own. He won't survive the journey, one commented dispassionately. That's between him and God now, Jake replied. But I suggest you ride fast if you want him to see a doctor before the end. They departed without further argument, leaving Jake, Maggie, and the injured Mrs. Walton staring at the burning remains of the ranch house. The fire had consumed most of the structure, though the barn and outbuildings had been spared. Jake holstered his weapon and turned to Mrs. Walton. Let's get you comfortable, he said gently, helping the older woman to a bench beneath a nearby tree. How badly are you hurt? Just bruises, she insisted. They were looking for Maggie. Got rough when I wouldn't tell them where you'd gone. Then that devil Greene ordered them to burn the house, said he was leaving me a message to deliver. Maggie knelt beside the housekeeper, guilt overwhelming her. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Walton. This is all because of me. The older woman patted her hand. Nonsense, child. This is because of a man who couldn't accept that he didn't own another human being. You've nothing to apologize for. Jake stood staring at the smoldering ruins of his home, his expression unreadable. Maggie approached him hesitantly. I don't know what to say, she began. Everything you've built. Just a house, Jake replied, though the tightness in his jaw belied his casual tone. Can build another. What matters is that you and Mrs. Walton are safe. I'll understand if you want to annul our marriage, Maggie said quietly. Now that Victor is unlikely to be a threat. You've lost so much because of me. Jake turned to her, genuine surprise in his eyes. Is that what you want? An annulment? No, Maggie answered truthfully, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. But I would understand if you did. Jake studied her face for a long moment. In all the chaos, I never asked, did you mean those vows we spoke? Or were they just words to secure your freedom? I meant them, Maggie said softly. Every word. I may not know what it is to love you yet, Jake Ingram, but I respect you more than any man I've ever known. If you'll have me, I'd like to try to build something real between us. Something based on mutual respect and care. A slow smile spread across Jake's face, transforming his features. I'd like that too, he said, taking her hand in his. Though I should warn you, I'm not much of a husband material. Never thought I'd marry at all, truth be told. And I never thought I'd escape Victor, Maggie replied. Yet here we are. Mrs. Walton cleared her throat from her perch on the bench. If you two are quite finished, we should consider where we're going to sleep tonight, seeing as our home is now a pile of charcoal. Jake laughed, the sound startling in the aftermath of the day's events. Always practical, Mrs. Walton. He looked around the property, assessing their options. The bunkhouse is intact. It's small, but it'll do until we can rebuild. I'll start salvaging what I can, Maggie offered. There must be some things that survived the fire. As the three of them began the process of taking stock of what remained, Maggie felt a curious sense of peace descending. Despite the destruction around them, despite the violence and fear of the past days, she felt safer than she had in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since she'd married Victor, it contained possibility rather than dread. Over the following weeks, that possibility blossomed into reality. The community rallied around them once the story spread. Ranchers and townspeople from Silverdale arrived with lumber, tools, and willing hands to help rebuild the Ingram home. Judge Patterson himself rode out to check on them, bringing news that Victor Greene had indeed died from his wounds before reaching Cheyenne. The case is closed, the judge informed them. Self-defense, clear and simple. No charges will be brought. Jake and Maggie worked side by side to rebuild, not just the house but a life together. Their marriage, begun as a legal convenience, gradually transformed into something deeper. Jake proved to be a patient, considerate husband who never raised his voice or hand to her. Maggie discovered strengths within herself she hadn't known existed: the ability to help manage the ranch, to learn new skills, to speak her mind without fear of retribution. They shared the small bunkhouse with Mrs. Walton, maintaining a respectable distance despite their married status. Jake never pressured Maggie for more than she was ready to give, understanding the scars, physical and emotional, that Victor had left behind. On a warm summer evening, as they sat on the newly constructed porch of their half-finished home, Maggie finally found the courage to bridge the distance between them. "Thank you for your patience with me," she said, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Jake looked at her, his expression gentle. "There's no timetable for healing, Maggie. You take whatever time you need." "The thing is," she continued, a slight tremor in her voice, "I don't think I need any more time." She met his gaze directly. "I think I'm ready to be your wife in more than just name." Jake's breath caught audibly. "Are you certain? Because I don't want you to feel Maggie leaned forward and silenced him with a kiss their first. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft against hers, his initial surprise giving way to a careful tenderness that made her heart race. When they parted, Jake looked at her with wonder. "What was that for?" "Because I wanted to," Maggie replied simply. "Because you've shown me what a good man truly is. And because—" She hesitated, then pressed forward. "Because I've fallen in love with you, Jake Ingram." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I've loved you since I found you by that creek," he admitted. "Tried not to, knowing what you'd been through. Told myself it was just protectiveness, then respect, then friendship. But it's always been love." That night, they truly became husband and wife, Jake's gentle tenderness healing wounds Victor had inflicted with his brutality. Maggie discovered that physical love could be beautiful rather than terrifying, a sharing rather than a taking. By the following spring, their new home was complete, larger and sturdier than the original, with a special suite for Mrs. Walton who refused to retire despite Jake's offers. "You two need someone to keep you in line," she insisted. "Besides, who else would teach the children you'll have someday how to make a proper pie crust?" In the summer of 1876, exactly 1 year after Judge Patterson had married them, Maggie gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Jake's mother. Standing beside the cradle, watching his wife and infant daughter, Jake's expression held a contentment that once seemed impossible. "Did you ever imagine we'd be here?" Maggie asked, reaching for his hand. "That day by the creek when you found me?" "No," Jake admitted. "I was just trying to help a woman in trouble. I never dreamed she'd become my whole world." Maggie looked around their home at the evidence of their life together, the love they'd built from the ashes of violence and fear. "Sometimes the best journeys take us places we never knew we wanted to go," she said softly. Outside, the Wyoming skies stretched endlessly blue over land that had witnessed both cruelty and kindness, both endings and beginnings. For Maggie Ingram, who had once been Maggie Greene, the path ahead held no fear, only the promise of love freely given and joyfully received.